Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today. I was hoping to make this a highly interactive presentation this afternoon, but as you may hear a little bit, I have COVID. So there's going to be some stopping and starting, but I've recorded this so that we can still have the presentation. And I've joined you virtually in person for questions after. May I ask you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep the presentation flowing. And if we don't have time to get to any of them, I'll be happy to answer them one-on-one after. Like many of you, my husband and I grew up in warm, loving families. Neither of us had known true adversity in our lives before we got married. We both have our MBAs, had wonderful careers, and then we had children. Life was rosy. Finding out that we didn't have one, but two children with multiple mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders came as quite a shock to us and turned our lives upside down. Words like Tourette syndrome, autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, anxiety and learning disabilities had never been part of my vocabulary before. That said, I am here as an ambassador of inspiration and empowerment. I'm here to tell you our family story, but also to spread the message to all of you with children, family members, friends, and colleagues with Tourette syndrome and associated conditions, that there's lots of happiness and hope, and that everyone should just persevere. It's very doable. I want to start with a quick disclaimer. As you can see, I'm white. I am heterosexual and privileged, and this has certainly shaped my experiences and made our family's journey easier in terms of being able to afford the sometimes very steep costs that come with raising neurodivergent children. But what I want to stress with you this afternoon is that the insights I'm going to share with you throughout the presentation are universal. They apply whether you're single or married, struggling financially, or not. And they cross all boundaries, including race, religion, culture, ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender identity, the list goes on. What it takes is grit, determination, and perseverance, and all of us can do that. Let's start with one key overarching insight in this presentation in my book, Hold On Tight. And that is insist on an integrated partnership approach with every professional involved in your child's care. This crosses all facets of your child's life and extends into adulthood. In healthcare, to this day, I make sure that both of my children's psychiatrists and psychologists communicate with one another so that they know what's going on and can adjust their approaches accordingly. In schools, I wouldn't have kept the kids at schools that didn't work in partnership with us. My daughter's school held monthly group meetings with her principal, all her teachers, her external psychologist, and us, so that we could make plans together, share perspectives, and listen to one another. And our son's school sent notes home every night, and we sent them back the next morning so that we always were in constant communication and knew what was happening. In employment, it's equally important to have, for neurodivergent individuals, to have understanding and inclusive employers. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I think the key point in partnerships is to get everyone on the same page, singing from the same hymn book, so to speak, so that the sum is much greater than the parts. And to me, partnership mean absolutely everything. So you've heard that I have two children. They're amazing, Andrew and Ainsley, as you see here, as children. They're grown now. But from almost the time they were born, my husband, David, and I felt that something wasn't right. Andrew's hands and feet as a baby moved in constant circular motion and never stopped. Unlike other babies, he didn't talk to himself, gurgle, or play in his crib. And he had no self-control when it came to feeding. We actually did an experiment when he was 6 months old and found that he would have as many bottles as he wanted without stopping. He actually consumed 5 straight bottles. And then we stopped him because we were scared. And the next day we decided to control his intake and only gave him 1 bottle, found that he was just as happy. So that we saw even then he had difficulty with self-regulation. Now, in hindsight, we know these are a number of neurodevelopmental markers. But of course, we were first-time parents. We didn't know any better. And every time I approached our doctor, he turned to me and said, "Jan, calm down. Your children are just fine. You need to stop being an overly vigilant parent." Sound familiar? I should have trusted my gut. And this is my next key insight. You know your children better than anyone else. If you think something is seriously wrong, it generally is. Of course, I'm sympathetic with doctors who see a number of parents who needlessly and excessively worry, and you do have to listen to your doctor. But if what they say doesn't resonate, keep looking. You deserve it. Get a second or a third opinion. Over the next number of years, David and I had growing concerns about both children. They were vocal and motor tics, distractibility, impulsivity, anxiety, learning disabilities. Neither child could hold a pencil or crayon correctly. Andrew had terrible difficulty with change and transitions between activities, and he was fairly literal. And Ainsley, her tics kept increasing. She was totally disruptive and out of control at school, constantly sent to the principal's office. And then came a lot of fragility, paralyzing anxiety, and the inability to read her friends' social cues, so that she gradually lost all her neighborhood friends. But our doctor kept discounting my concerns, kept telling me, "Look, your kids learn to read and write on time. They're doing simple math. They have friends. They're cheery and outgoing. It's just a bit of stress, especially the tics. Don't worry, they will outgrow it." Then suddenly, shortly after Andrew's 9th birthday, he erupted out of nowhere into daily, frightening 2-hour screaming meltdowns, punching holes in walls, kicking and screaming, lashing out in anything and everything in his way. It was terrifying. And this was followed within a month by nonstop compulsive rituals in which he touched walls repeatedly for hours. Couldn't put his socks on for 20, 30 minutes. Couldn't walk through doors without going back and forth 14 times. And they escalated and became bizarre. He would rub his head against shrubs and carved bushes. It was very, very upsetting to him and to us. I felt like I was in the twilight zone. But finally, his symptomology was so clear and so severe that he was fully diagnosed. Tourette syndrome was his umbrella diagnosis, along with autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, and learning disabilities. And with Ainsley, we didn't know at first if she was coping with it. They both had severe tics. They both had a lot of anxiety and impulsivity. But while Andrew was rule-bound, she was totally out of control. And again, her behavior and symptomology were severe enough that she was finally diagnosed, also with Tourette as her umbrella diagnosis, along with ADHD, learning disabilities, and severe mood and anxiety disorders. As I write in Hold On Tight, it's been quite a journey. Quite a challenging journey to find the right healthcare professionals, the right schools. So what did I do? And here's an important insight. Embrace the power of research. Research is so important, not only in helping you find resources, that seems obvious, but it actually helps you become a far more effective advocate. At the time, I read everything that I could. Books like Teaching the Tiger by Cheryl Pruitt. There were classic books on ADHD called Driven to Distraction by Edward Hallowell. books on OCD, The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Washing by Judith Rappaport. I watched videos about Tourette syndrome and autism, and the list goes on. David and I also embarked upon research to start looking into support groups. And the first support group we attended and that we found were for parents of children with ADHD. And it was wonderful to find parents of kids like ours who were impulsive, hyperactive, and distracted. But of course, no other parent had children who were ticking to the extent both of ours were, or who were having those frightening daily meltdowns. And it was only a few months later, when David happened to be researching Tourette syndrome, that he saw the word meltdown and rage associated with emotional overload. And I can't tell you how quickly we ran to our nearest Tourette Canada support group. We found our home. Other parents who were undergoing the same experience as we were. Everyone was extremely caring and delightful to chat with, accepting, empathetic, non-judgmental, and so reaffirming to this day. Of course, with research, you have to know when to take a breather. The law of diminishing returns does kick in. So stop and breathe. Of course, you never completely stop because there are always new findings, new medications, therapies, and it's important to stay current. I know you all know to be wary about the internet, but it is a crucial source of research. Just make sure you verify all information with experts. And of course, I know you know that tics are not caused just because your child wants attention and they could stop, or that ADHD comes from poor parenting. I see these on the net all the time, and it just continues to astound me. Once the kids were diagnosed, our family entered a whole new world of medications and therapy. Now, in my mind, for my family, these are powerful partners that help one another. Of course, some of you may not need either or both if the tics are mild or if they don't cause any problem or not interfering in a meaningful way in a child's life. But for many children, including Andrew and Ainsley, they've needed both from the beginning and will for the foreseeable future, and that's fine. They've also needed the medications to start working and kick in first to change the brain chemistry enough to allow therapy to start working. With medications, I know a number of you parents are understandably wary about taking a pharmacological approach to treatment. And there's no question that you have to weigh the delicate interaction and monitor the side effects that come with multiple medications in particular. After 9 months of those daily frightening meltdowns that Andrew had, you can imagine how drained and exhausted I was. I found a new developmental pediatrician who prescribed a powerful antipsychotic medication. And within 2 days, I kid you not, 2 days, his meltdown stopped. There were no more. We were so relieved, although I wanted to kick myself that I hadn't found him earlier. But of course, with this medication came some concerning side effects. Andrew started gaining 3 pounds a week on this medication. And it continued unabated for 6 straight weeks. Thankfully, it stopped then. I know other children who have gained 60, 70 pounds on this medication. But I can tell you that for us at least, to this day, it's a life-saving medication. And Ainsley has tried a number of medications, some of which have been effective, some of which have not, and some of which have caused nausea, dizziness, shakiness. So anyway, there's a lot of trial and error and mistakes along the way, and that's okay. Remember, too, that governments all have programs to help defray costs if needed. So it's something that each family has to weigh, but for us, the benefits have far outweighed the risks. And with therapy, here you see Ainsley at our major sick kids hospital in downtown Toronto, working with her therapist on, I believe it was her anxiety at the time. Anyway, you need to find qualified professionals who are trained in the issues your child is facing. So we all know in Tourette syndrome, CBIT, comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, has, at least for my kids, has been fairly effective in terms of making them aware of the urge to tic, the triggers that increase tics, learning competing response behaviors when they feel the urge, and some relaxation training. And importantly, as parents, don't forget that therapy is a family affair. It's not just for the child. Every single family member is involved and can be trained with CBIT. So as a parent, I learned to recognize and deal with my own responses. There's no question that I had some annoyance and frustration at times. And just last week, I had a parent call me and say, I'm actually embarrassed by my child's tics, which is a shame. I've tried to work with her a little bit. CBIT helped me identify situations that make the kids' tics worse and develop plans. It's taught me strategies to help with disruptive behaviors that, as we know, are often associated with Tourette. I think you all know to use positive reinforcement and praise, especially when your child is using competing response training. I had to learn not to react to the tics or treat Andrew or Ainsley differently because of them, but to really focus on their strengths. Structure and routine, not only for Tourette, but associated conditions, are so important in keeping them busy, but also learning relaxation techniques that could help the children. Now, CBIT is great for many children with Tourette. My children also benefited from different cognitive behavioral therapy for both their anxiety and ADHD. And Andrew really benefited from exposure and response prevention for his OCD and still uses it. They use all these strategies to this day. Remember that the environment is unique to each child and that differences are not deficits. That's really important. Now, throughout this period, David and I quickly learned the importance of talking openly with Andrew and Ainsley. You know, children who are neurodivergent are frightened when they don't know fully what's going on in their lives, why they're causing havoc and sometimes pain and anguish at home and at school. They want help, even if they don't ask for it. And this, by the way, includes teenagers. So sit down with them. Let them know they're understood and valued. Listen carefully without judgment or criticism, which frankly is not one of my strengths. David and I had to overcome our initial hesitations in this regard. When Andrew was experiencing those frightening meltdowns and then those nonstop rituals, he actually turned to us one afternoon and said, Mom, I just want to die. And after Ainsley was sent to the principal's office for her out-of-control behavior for the umpteenth time, she wrote me a note. And it said, I know I'm a bad child, but I can't help my out-of-control behavior. You can imagine how I felt. But David and I quickly picked ourselves up, sat down with the kids, ensured that they understood they weren't bad children, that what was happening was not their fault. We separated them from their issues so that their identities weren't tied 100% to their issues. And importantly, we didn't hide or avoid information, and that includes discussing their medications. I know a number of parents of children with Tourette who call the medications special vitamins because they want their children to take medications. I understand that. And they're afraid that they'll be singled out and feel different and won't want to do so. I don't think that's helpful, though. What you want to do is educate your child and involve them so that as they grow older, they increasingly become empowered and can participate actively in their own treatment and advocacy. It's a wonderful thing to see. And with siblings, it's so easy to unintentionally relegate siblings with no issues or fewer issues, Ainsley has fewer than Andrew, to the background while you're consumed with a child in crisis. I know I've done it. One afternoon, I came home from work and I was horrified to find Ainsley hiding in her closet, shaking in fear because Andrew was having one of those meltdowns. I should have protected her better. And David and I, again, quickly picked ourselves up, started spending whatever precious little time we had. And as you all know, there's very precious little time. And we started engaging one-on-one in activities that she enjoyed, must be activities that the child enjoys. In her case, it was playing hockey and baseball, soccer, baking together, certain board games like Candyland and Checkers. Toronto had a wonderful urban farm program at the time for siblings in trauma, and it gave her desperately needed respite and started her on a lifelong love of animals. We also sent her to sibling support groups, very, very helpful. And perhaps most importantly, we sat down with her again and explained what was going on with Andrew in detail, in age-appropriate language, of course, so that we demystified what was happening. And it became less frightening to her. During this time, we learned another key insight that I think is very important. And that is to reset the expectations for your lives as needed. Tourette and associated conditions can throw every family member's life into some disarray. That's okay. There's going to be fear, anger, and resentment at times. I know I've been there. There have been days where I've looked at myself in the mirror and said, why me? Why us? But the key to being able to move forward is to not only accept, but to embrace the fact that your life may not be as planned or hoped for in some ways. And then you can move forward and see the path ahead. David and I started our journey the same as every young parent, with hopes and dreams of happy, successful children. Yet our reality was somewhat different. The Tourette tics never bothered us, to be frank, except when Andrew, to this day, throws his neck back. It concerns me that he's going to physically hurt himself. But other than that, it was really the associated conditions that frightened and drained us. We had to stop having a social life for a while because we never knew what the behavior was going to be like. And we had to learn, as part of resetting our expectations, to recalibrate the support we could expect to receive from certain family members and friends. As you know, this is due to a lack of education and awareness that can lead to fear, misunderstandings, and stigma. Both David's and my families were extremely, and still are, understanding and well-meaning. But even my mother, who was my closest confidant and friend in the world, and who I thought understood everything, actually turned to me one afternoon and said, Jan, Andrew's taking this wonderful medication that stopped his meltdowns, but you don't want a fat child. Really, Mom? I've heard parents tell me that their families are scared to get involved, don't have the time to get involved. I had a parent call me last week whose mother had said to her, oh, it's too bad your son will never be able to live a normal life. So you have to learn to navigate and limit your engagement with those family members who are critical, judgmental, or in my case, the worst, who think they have all the answers. And with friends, don't be surprised if some of them distance themselves for the same reasons as well. I've had it happen. And of course, what compounded it in my case, and I'm sure in some of yours, is that I was so consumed with the children's care that I had no time to devote to my friendships. But the silver lining again is those other parents of children with Tourette. It was absolutely wonderful to form this great community. And we even joke about situations that other families wouldn't understand. A number of years ago, Andrew and I were walking our dog in some trails near Toronto, and Andrew was vocally ticking. He was hooting. It sounded like, woo, woo, woo. passerby came running up and said to him, "Are you okay?" And I remember thinking, uh-oh, I don't know what's going to happen. But without batting an eye, Andrew simply looked at her and said, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm just bird calling." So I don't know how he found that answer, but it was absolutely brilliant. And it really is those other parents of neurodivergent children that gave us hope and have always propelled me forward to persevere. As Andrew and Ainsley transitioned into adulthood, we faced a new set of challenges. Now, for you parents of younger children, you may not yet know your children's capabilities and needs, but you may, like us, have to take care of your children for longer than you imagined. Some of you may not, which would be wonderful, but this can be expensive. I'm talking about medications not covered by insurance, private therapy, and for some of you, even some type of supportive housing. Let's talk first about employment. Here you see Andrew proudly wearing the shirt of his employer, Rogers Communications, which is one of Canada's leading telecommunications companies. As the statistics show, the unemployment rate for neurodivergent individuals is higher than the average population, and underemployment is even more magnified. It's really terrible to see. And of course, we know that these are individuals with great capabilities and skills and who want to work meaningfully. There's so much still needless discrimination and stigma. I look at Andrew, and he has a lot of vocal and motor tics. He's a speech impediment, making him difficult to understand. Doesn't understand social cues. And he does take more of a supervisor's oversight and time, and equally needs more time off for healthcare and similar appointments. By the way, again, every government has resources to help with job assistance. And I know, for instance, in Ontario, the province I live in Canada, we have the Ontario Disability Support Program with both income supports and employment supports, and we've used them, as well as additional job assistance programs. As I write in Hold On Tight, there's been quite a contrast between Andrew's previous employers and Rogers, his current employer. His previous employers were well-meaning, but his first one needlessly discriminated against him. He was a cashier at a major retailer and excelled there for 5 years, and then new management came in. And after observing him ticking with customers, they pulled him without explaining to the back and told him to start stocking shelves. It was apparent to me what happened. You can imagine how irate I became, and I had to take care of that right away. And his second employer really wanted to do the right thing, but was too bureaucratic to work in partnership with us. There's that word partnership again. And so they treated Andrew like a child. They gave him 1 hour of boring work every morning. And remember, boring work is not good for any of us, but particularly for a brain with ADHD. And then they told him as a reward, he could go watch TV. Not good. But Rogers has translated that well-meaning into practice. And a good part of the reason for Andrew's success there is the partnership they have formed with them. Even before he started, Andrew invited me, and he and I held an in-service education session with Rogers where we explained his profiles, his strength. We discussed what Tourette syndrome and his co-occurring conditions were, how they translated into the workplace, which in Andrew's case is mostly impulsivity and anxiety. We talked about what they could do. And since that time, they have listened to our recommendations and shared our advice. Now, for most adults with Tourette syndrome, you must advocate for yourself and do what we've done. But if you don't feel that you're strong enough emotionally to do so, or that you need help, certainly bring an ally like Andrew has brought me. It can be a family member, a friend, or even a professional. Someone who can advocate with you and for you, but partnership is the key word. So on Andrew's recommendation, Rogers has brought in a job coach from the beginning, not only to help integrate Andrew into Rogers 4.5 years ago, but to this day, every month, the job coach meets with both Rogers and Andrew. Rogers has also customized accommodations for Andrew. He told them that he had difficulty with change and transitions, so they've set his work hours the same every day, while the rest of his teammates work on shifts. It's wonderful to see. And what they get in return is a valued, hardworking employee who wants to stay at Rogers for the rest of his career until he's 70, he says, and who wants to be the best employer, not the best neurodivergent employee. Now, housing. There's a whole continuum of needs, as you all know, and many of you and your children will not need any type of support. Ainsley certainly has never needed supportive housing. But we felt that Andrew, and he agreed, would need some type of support. We just weren't sure how. So we got on those wait lists, and unfortunately, the wait lists across North America for supportive housing are years and years long. It's terrible to see. And of course, then I went back to that insight of embracing research. And I kept digging. And about 9 months later, I found a private small group home just 10 or 15 minutes away from where we lived that was opening up, and where Andrew moved enthusiastically. Now, very expensive. But I want you to know, for those that need it, there are a number of options. There are families that take in neurodivergent individuals. You could consider renting a unit for your child and having a pull-out couch or bringing in a support worker as needed. Depends on what you need. There are organizations that help in each community as well. So you've got to be creative, but persevere. It's doable. After 10 wonderful years there, management made the decision, as was their right, to focus on a different type of clientele, one that was more in transition and independent. And Andrew needs more protection and security than independence. So back to research I went. But we felt at the time that Andrew could capably handle supportive independent living. And that's where we are today. It's worked out beautifully. We found a bright, sunny 1-bedroom, and here you see Andrew in it, just 5 minutes away from our home. And ever since then, David and I take turns going down every morning. We help wake him up because his medications put him in a quite deep sleep. We help oversee him getting ready for the day, his meal preparation, and off he goes to work for the day. And Ainsley similarly found a unit just 5 minutes away on the other side. So we're all very close to one another. And that's important to us. It gives all of us comfort and gives the children security to know that they are right by each other. By the way, they call each other multiple times a day and see each other almost every day. And although life has been tough for us at times, there have been many benefits. It's propelled all of us in our family to start advocating years ago. David co-leads the Toronto Tourette Canada Support Group. It's wonderful to see. Ainsley is active in the support group, and she raises funds for the annual Tourette Canada Trek. And Andrew is also active in the Trek, in the support group, and is an active participant in Rogers' inclusion and diversity initiatives. I've served on about 7 different boards and advisory councils in Canada and the United States. I was formerly vice chair of Canada's leading psychiatric hospital, CAMH. I'm currently a consultant, proudly, to the Tourette Association of America's Education Advisory Board. I chair the largest autism provider organization in Canada, Carey's Place, and I write a monthly column on autism for Today's Parent. From all these activities, many struggling parents through the years have reached out to David and me for help. And I so remember being in this position, frightened, frozen, not knowing where to turn or how. And that's why I wrote Hold On Tight. I want readers to understand the reality of raising neurodivergent children. I want to educate their families, friends, healthcare providers, employers, educators. But importantly, I want to celebrate successes. I want to stress again, differences are not deficits. And I gift readers with a number of the key insights I've been sharing with you this afternoon. Let me share a few more with you now. If you haven't done a full financial plan, or if you've done one and haven't updated in a while, now is the time to do so. Again, for you parents of younger kids, you may not yet know your children's capabilities, but I want you to be conservative and plan accordingly. As the American author Alan Laken says, failing to plan is planning to fail. If you're not adept at it, try to find a financial planner, and ideally a fee-based planner who doesn't sell product and who is objective. They're not expensive, and it makes a huge difference between a more secure and a more uncertain future. This is something you need to revisit and update regularly, by the way, along with your wills and estates and the rest of your documents. Be kind to your partner. Here's a picture of David. Now, obviously, this is true for all partnerships and marriages, not just for those who have neurodivergent children. But we know that these conditions can cause and exacerbate stress and strain and can play havoc with partnerships. I've heard parents blame one another, accuse one another, undermine one another. There can be differences about everything, from diagnoses to discipline, from therapy to medications. I think medications in particular cause a lot of disagreements. One parent may not believe in medications, may not believe that the child needs medications, may be understandably concerned that the child is going to turn into a zombie on them. But remember that these issues cause schisms, and children have antennae. They know when their parents aren't on the same page. David and I, again, not immune. There have been times when we've had so little time for each other, much less ourselves. But the key is that we lean on one another. We trust one another. We even joke about the genesis of the kids' disorders. A few years ago, one of David's relatives came to visit, and he was ticking throughout dinner. He was eye blinking nonstop and shoulder shrugging. And when he left, I turned to David and said, aha, Tourette syndrome. And David turned right back at me with my perfectionism and says, aha, back, OCD. So, it doesn't really matter from a family perspective. It's interesting and important from a clinical and a research perspective, where these conditions come from. What's important is that you act harmoniously as much as possible as a unit in your child's best interest. Really give each other the benefit of the doubt. And of course, take care of yourself. Now, this goes far beyond healthy eating, sleeping, and exercising. Those are all really important, and you definitely don't want to ignore those. Reach out for the support that you yourself need, whether it's to psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, other professionals. As I've mentioned, I found other parents of kids with Tourette and support groups to be particularly reaffirming for me. And those parents have really strengthened my emotional fortitude. Don't forget humor. It's an important part of our coping toolkit. Years ago, one of Andrew's teachers said to him, Andrew, that school rule is set in stone. And I mentioned earlier how Andrew is literal And so he turned to her, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, and said, "Where's the stone kept?" So we do try to poke fun at our lives and not take them too seriously all the time. You must carve out part of your life as your own, away from your partner, away from your children. You can too easily get burned out and sucked into what's going on of the struggles at home. You don't want that to happen. So whether it's your career that separates you from the issues at home, or your hobbies. I play bridge and compete at a very high level, and I've got to focus 200% on bridge and on nothing else. The treadmill at the gym in particular helps me think through my issues and regain perspective. So whether it's even a 10-minute break, you've got to take these breaks, a walk by myself, or I personally love a warm, soothing bubble bath. All these activities give you some needed breathing room, help you refuel and rebuild your own identity. They're important. And equally important, try to forgive yourself for your mistakes. Be kind to yourself. This is not an easy one for me. I mentioned earlier that it took me months to forgive myself for not having protected Ainsley better when I found her hiding in her closet in fear during her brother's meltdown. But I also know how important it is to compliment myself. And I do regularly pat myself on the back and remind myself of strength and fortitude. Please do that. You are your child's champion. You are your child's hero, and you are more than enough. So while Andrew and Ainsley have been through quite a journey, I look at them today with such pride. Andrew has this wonderful full-time job at Rogers. He advocates for himself, and he has an infectious charm. He was recently at the barber, and as is his custom with his lack of filter, he chatted up everyone in the room. When he got up to pay, the barber said, "Andrew, you don't have to pay. The customer who just left was so impressed by you that he paid." And this happens to Andrew regularly. And Ainsley is such a gifted child and youth counselor working in the school system with young neurodivergent children. And I'm convinced that it's her own lived experiences and her deep intrinsic knowledge of her brother that have made her such a valued resource. Their grit, determination, will to succeed, and that word perseverance are simply breathtaking. As I said at the beginning, I am here as an ambassador of inspiration and empowerment. My book is widely available, and if it resonates with you, I would love to know what you think. You can reach out to me through my website at, as you see, jenstewartauthor.com. You can also sign up for my quarterly newsletter with more insights and tips there. I'm thrilled that Hold On Tight has won the Mom's Choice Award. I post on Instagram particularly, but also Facebook every day about neurodiversity at Jan Stewart Author. And this really has become my raison d'etre and my mantra right now. I hope this afternoon that I have given you some inspiration and empowerment to persevere through the most difficult of times, have hope, and hold on tight. Many thanks. I'm going to now go live, virtually, so to speak, and turn it over for questions. Thank you.